Hello, my name is Lee Presser. This is my show. I speak frequently to very interesting people. Some of these conversations are so exciting, so intellectually stimulating, I thought others might like to listen in. This is the reason we started recording Conversation with Lee Presser.
Welcome to Conversation with Lee Presser. The Show Me Institute is a research and educational organization dedicated to improving the quality of life in Missouri by advancing sensible, well-researched solutions to state and local policy issues. Institute scholars study public policy problems and develop proposals to increase economic opportunity. Those solutions are presented in written studies, briefing papers, and educational materials which help policymakers, the media, and the general public gain a better understanding of those issues. One of those analysts is Audrey Spalding. Today, she will be discussing two issues about which she has done research. They are the St. Louis City's Land Reutilization Authority, the LRA, and the so-called China Hub, or as it's lovingly known in Jefferson City as the Aerotropolis bill. These two issues are important to your pocketbook and to your tax bill, so listen up. Audrey Spalding, welcome to Conversation.
Thanks for having me.
How long have you been with the Show Me Institute?
I've been with the Institute for about 2 years. I was most recently promoted to be a policy analyst here.
And how did you happen to come to the Show Me Institute? What were you doing before that? In other words, tell me your biography here a little bit.
Well, I was actually studying journalism and economics at the University of Missouri in Columbia. And during that time, I was reporting on education issues for the Columbia Missourian. And I had written a lengthy piece on education spending in the Columbia Public School District. And I took it to my professor and said, what do you think? And he said, this is great, you should intern for the Show Me Institute. And really the rest is history. I've been with the Show Me Institute as an intern, as a staff writer, as a public information specialist, and finally as a policy analyst.
Right. And you came from University of Michigan area, Ann Arbor, didn't you?
That's right. I grew up in Ann Arbor, Michigan. I would have stayed there, but they didn't have a journalism program.
So Columbia's gain.
Yeah.
So then you went there to Show Me Institute. You now are the policy analyst, and you got handed this thing about. Well, let's talk first about this thing called LRA. Again, that's the Land Reutilization Authority.
That's
right. So let's do the background. What the heck is that?
Okay, so the city of St. Louis, as I'm sure a lot of your viewers know, has a lot of vacant property. And they...
No. You mean that stuff that looks like it's like left over from Germany in 1945?
That's right. That's vacant. Nobody lives there. And there's this agency that takes it over. And that agency is called the Land Reutilization Authority, the LRA. Now, this agency was created in the 1970s because so many people were leaving the city that there needed to be some sort of city entity to take the property that they were leaving behind and to try to get it back into private productive use.
They were simply walking away from this land.
Right.
It's not like they were selling it off.
Right, they were just walking away and letting the city take it over. So the city takes it over. The idea is to get it back into private productive use. But as we now know, this agency has just continued to amass land. They started off with about 2,000 parcels. They now have more than 9,000. So it's 1 out of every 15 properties in the city of St. Louis is owned by this agency. So it owns a ton of property. And our question was, well, if its goal is to get this property back into private productive use, how is it doing that? Or is it trying to do that? And we started just very basically. We said, okay, so you have 9,000 parcels, you want to sell them. How come your for sale list has only half the property that you own? Surely, if you want to sell it all, you'd put all of your property on your for sale list. You wouldn't hide half of it. And that was the first problem that kind of made us say, well, maybe we should look a little bit closely into this. The second problem is was
like the other half, were they like primo properties that somebody was trying to hide away for their brother-in-law or something?
Well, what it turns out happens is that city aldermen, as well as the staff members for this LRA, they have this power where they can say, I want to classify these properties as C. And what that means for everyone else is that they draw a boundary around those properties and they say, these are C. And what happens is those are taken off the for sale list. At least that was happening in the past before our research said maybe this isn't a good idea. They've since fixed that. But before, aldermen could say, I have this friend, or I have this idea to develop something over here. Can we turn this into Class C? And then poof, it's off the for sale list. So after seeing that, we started going to those public meetings, because the LRA meets once a month, and it considers offers from people who've been trying to buy its property. And just sitting in on those meetings, those are public meetings, they're only half an hour long, once a month, sitting in on those, it was apparent that the agency was just turning away people who really wanted to buy the property. And I'm not talking about people who would come in and say, I want this property for $1, why don't you give it to me? I'm talking about people who would come in and say, here's my bid, it matches your sales price, here's my plan, I want to turn it into a business or a restaurant or a home, why won't you sell it to me? And what we found was that the most common reason that the agency would give for not selling property, it had nothing to do with financial capabilities. It was that the agency wanted to hold property for future development.
Now, this is not C property. You're talking about the rest of it.
Right, the rest of it, occasionally someone might figure out that the agency owns a property that's not on its for sale list and then show up and try to buy it. But yeah, these were people trying to buy all of this property, not just the property that is classified C, that's held off the for sale list. And so going in there and seeing that these people were being turned away made us say, we really need to do an in-depth study of this. Let's get all of the minutes from these meetings. Let's turn them into a database that can tell us what the agency's track record is in selling property. And when we did that, it was startling. And like I said, this agency's been around since 1970. This is the first review that anyone did of, do you sell property to people who want to buy it? And what we found is that the LRA, the city agency, was turning away 1 out of every 2 offers. It would just say, no, we're not interested in that. And it's incredible, because why not? Because when you're the city and you hold on to this vacant property, you pay to maintain it. This vacant property.
Cut the grass.
You cut the grass. And, which by the way, this agency pays about $1 million a year just to cut the grass. So it's a huge drain on the city budget. So why would you, if someone comes to you and says, I want to buy it, why not sell it? What could possibly be the problem for selling it?
Did they ever give you, did you go to them as a reporter and ask that question, or what was said in response to this question?
What we did is, after coming up with that number, we actually, before publication, we called up the agency and said, we want to meet with you, show you our research. I mean, they knew we were doing research because we've been going to all their meetings, and we want to know if there's anything that we've overlooked, if you have any answer as to why not sell this property. And the staff members, they really weren't surprised at the 1 out of every 2 offers is turned down. That didn't surprise them. But what the staff members said, as well as a number of other planning officials that I spoke to, because I called a lot of people and said, okay, you are in city planning, why wouldn't you sell this property? What reason would there be to not sell this property? It really comes down to a mechanism for land use control. So there's this fear that if the city owns 9,000 properties, it controls what happens to them. It knows, okay, they're sitting vacant, but nothing's going to happen on that property that we don't like. If the city sells a property to someone else and they own it, I mean, the city loses its control. So one of the fears was that, well, what if somebody buys a property and does something on it that we don't like, that's not part of the plan, because of course there's this city plan that's supposed to govern everything. What if that doesn't adhere to the plan? From my perspective, okay, it doesn't adhere to the plan, but it's tax dollars for you. You're no longer paying to maintain it. There's no longer this vacant, rotting structure sitting next to other people's homes that's basically telling them every day, maybe you should think about leaving. To me, it seems win-win, but there really was this kind of visceral fear of losing control of these properties.
Pause there a second. This is all too familiar. I mean, it sounds like a MASH episode. In which they're trying to get an incubator. Maybe you've seen this episode, and there is some major somewhere who has a warehouse, and he's got the incubators there, but he says to them, well, if I give you one, then I'll have one less. And they're saying like, but we're going to use it actually in our medical practice. Oh no, you can't have, because then I won't have one.
Yeah.
That's what it sounds like to, and that was supposed to be comedic, and what you're saying is real. This is actually happening.
This is what happens when you set up an agency in the 1970s and you don't have really any checks on it. You know, the staff members, they don't lose their jobs if they don't sell property. This agency just continues on. And I have to tell you, it was so depressing to go to those meetings because no one was there except people who were trying to buy the property. So you want to talk about transparency and accountability. No reporters were going to those meetings. No outside entities were going to those meetings. It was just the people there saying, why won't you sell? And the commissioners sitting at the table saying, well, we don't like what you propose.
Since your report, we're going to jump ahead a little bit here. Since your report, our reporter is now going to these meetings that you know of?
One reporter went to a meeting.
A meeting.
A meeting.
Okay.
Channel 4, KMOV, did an investigative piece, and they went to a meeting and they asked them tough questions.
Yes.
The St. Louis Post-Dispatch hasn't reported on this. I don't know why, but they haven't reported on this. I will say that the Show Me Institute's research was so compelling because, again, it was the first of its kind. It was the first time this agency had ever been subject to this level of scrutiny, that a number of positive changes have taken place. Like I said, the Class C thing where they take the property off the for sale list, that doesn't happen anymore.
How did you know that these properties existed if they weren't on a list?
Okay, well, because it's city government, there are all of these different sources of information. The city assessor's office keeps track of all the properties in St. Louis City. So we saw from the city assessor list that the LRA owned 9,000 properties. We looked at their for sale list. It said
So the
only have
recorder
45.
actually shows that title is held by this agency
That's
to
right.
these various parcels.
That's right.
Okay.
Even though their for sale list was only half of what they owned. So they've made that positive change.
Did you look at that and like realize immediately, or is this like something you were like going down and like, wait a second?
Well, one of the things that your viewers can do is if they go to showmeinstitute.org, we've posted a lot of maps of these properties and where people have been trying to buy them. What happened is when we saw that only half of those properties were for sale, my first question was, well, where are the properties that aren't for sale? Are they just scattered throughout the city and are there just ones that for whatever reasons are unviable? Or are they only in one area? So what we mapped the assessor properties, and then we overlaid the LRA properties, and suddenly it was just so clear there were these boundaries. You know, so what you would see is like, imagine the city of St. Louis looks something like this. There are just these rectangles of properties that aren't for sale. And those are those boundaries that the aldermen and the staff members would draw lines around and say, we want these to be Class C. Which, by the way, in our report, we list some of those reasons for why an alderman would say this is Class C. And the reasons just kind of, if you're pro-development, they kind of turn your stomach, because it's things like the alderman requests that these properties be Class C so that only an approved developer can buy them. Or the alderman requests that these properties be Class C because we want to facilitate residential development. And it's like, well, if you want to facilitate it, why don't you let all these people who want to buy it and turn it into homes step in? Or are you really just waiting for one individual or one friend to step in and do the development?
Talk about a few of these cases, just so that people have an idea of just regular folks trying to buy this stuff and what it is that they wanted to do with the properties.
Well, sure. One of the cases that our research revealed was at 1252 Academy. It's this property there's the Central West End in St. Louis, a very affluent area, and then there's the Academy neighborhood, which sits right on top of it before you get into North St. Louis, where there's a lot of deterioration. So this property's in this...
When you say on top of, so just to the north of.
Just to the north of, right.
Okay.
And there's this property that's sitting right in the middle of it, where this neighborhood could go either way. And 1252 Academy, many people have tried to buy it over the years. In 2001, a man tried to buy it to turn it into a home and was turned down because the property was being held for future development. Fast forward past many other offers to turn it into office space, to turn it into a parking
2001,
lot.
you said?
2001.
And this is 2011, and it's still sitting there.
It's still sitting there,
Right.
and not because people haven't been trying to buy it. And these are great proposals. People who've rehabbed other properties in the area, who have experience, who have the money. In their application, they say, this is the money we're going to put forward. We're not asking for you to give us money. Here's our money. We want to do the project. Fast forward to 2010, and a man, Anthony Barber, wants to buy the property to turn it into a barbecue restaurant because a family friend way back when owned 1252 Academy and ran it as a barbecue. So here he comes back from Chicago. He says, I want to buy this property. I want to turn it into a barbecue restaurant. I've already got the menu figured out. Can I buy it? And they say, no, the property is being held for future development. Like, we've been waiting for 10 years, where is this? And it makes no sense. Why not? This area has a lot of residential homes. It's right next to a busy street. It'd be a great place for a barbecue restaurant. I'm sure he had the support of the alderman, he had the support of the community organization, and still they said no.
And this was not a Class C property either.
No, this was just a
regular
property.
Piece of property that should be sold.
Right. And when we started asking questions about this, and then when Channel 4 got involved, they said, well, what about Anthony Barber and 1252 Academy? And the response was, we'll have to take a closer look at that. So right now, they're actually reconsidering his offer because
on one parcel.
Right. I'm only one person. I can't go and look at the 2,000 other people who were turned down and get the city to change its mind on them too. I'm only one person. Like, this really needs to be some systematic change.
Well, let's talk first. Who are these people, these decision makers?
Well, there's a commission of 3 people.
Right.
And they have the final determination on this, and they're appointed by the mayor's office, the comptroller's office, and the Board of Education.
The Board of Education.
The Board of Education.
Okay.
And
the appointed one or the elected one?
The appointed. These are all, oh, I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
It's now the appointed, the Special Administrative Board. And so these 3 people sit there, and they can serve as long as the people who appointed them deem that they're doing their job. So for some people, they've been sitting for decades.
So that was like 1 day.
Yeah, you'd think so, but no, they've been there for years.
Sorry, go ahead.
So they've been there for years, and so they sit there. They have the final approval. That being said, there's the staff, and the staff has a lot of power.
And how many staff are we talking about?
Probably about 10 people who are intimately involved.
So now we're
with
like 13 people here,
right.
all of whom are being paid?
Yeah, the staff are being paid, the commissioners are not.
Oh, okay.
Now, I will say a former commissioner who resigned coincidentally around the time of our publication, he's now been hired on as a
staffer because he's getting paid.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
So maybe being a commissioner has its financial perks later.
Yeah. But
these staff members are powerful enough. What they do is they consider all the offers that come in, and they draft what their recommendations. Most of the time, the commissioners always follow their recommendations. I spoke to one commissioner, and he said, yeah, I read over their recommendations, and then I go into the meeting, and unless I hear something different, I pretty much follow their recommendations. That's what they're there for. But if you think about it, those people aren't elected. Those people are staff members. They've been in there, some of them, for decades. They haven't had any level of scrutiny, and they're allowed to kind of sit in this bubble and say, no, we don't want a barbecue restaurant there. We want a home there instead, so we're not going to sell.
Right. Yeah, this doesn't sound good. So how long did your research, by the way, we've only got like 10 minutes left. Believe it or not, we've gone through that much time. And I do want to get to the China hub here, but how long did this research take you on LRA? And say what LRA is again?
The Land Reutilization Authority.
St. Louis City.
St. Louis City.
And how long?
It took about a year.
A year.
And I have to say there are other agencies like the LRA, and they do their job. Their information about how many properties they're selling and everything else, their budget, everything is available publicly. So if I were doing this in Flint, Michigan, which has an organization like the LRA, it would have taken me a lot less time. It's because this agency really kind of avoided any sort of transparency.
And has Mayor Slay's office commented on your work?
Yes, and I think I'm going to try to recite their comment from memory. Their comment, and this was, we sent them our numbers, again, prior to publication, saying, we just want to know if you have any comment on the fact that your agency sells only 1 out of every 2 properties to people who want to buy it. They said, this study is more polemic. This is more polemic than study, and it relies on a great many assumptions. They didn't explain what those assumptions were, and since then they haven't made further comment.
So they just dissed your report as if it wasn't scientifically done.
That's right.
Okay. Well, I wish I'd known that. We had the mayor here not that many weeks ago, and we could have asked him about that.
Yeah, I'd be interested to hear what he has to say.
I would too.
Yeah.
Perhaps next time he comes by, we'll have an opportunity to ask. Now we're going to move on to China Hub, or as I said, the so-called China Hub, or they call it the what? Aerotropolis?
Aerotropolis.
I don't know where that came from, but that was actually the language in legislation, wasn't it?
Right.
Okay. So let's just define what is it? What is this China Hub, Aerotropolis? Just what is that?
Okay. So the Aerotropolis idea is that a city would center its economic activity around the airport. So it would have a lot of trade from international companies. It would just be, the airport would be this hub. There would be lots of jobs around the airport. There'd be a lot of warehouses dealing with all the international cargo that comes in and out. Something that you might see in Detroit or Chicago, where it's really connected to the world as a whole. St. Louis, not so much. We don't have that much international activity going on at our airport. So the idea...
Don't have much activity at all going on at our airport.
Right.
Go ahead.
Yeah. And so we would take our airport and just kind of bump it up, and so it would get in on the global scene and have all sorts of trade from South America and China, and this would be it. This would remake St. Louis, and our economic activity would just grow, and this would be fantastic. That's the idea. Now, what happened, and I have no problem with that. I mean, I'm all for international trade. But what happened is, late into the legislative session, an attorney who's been kind of dealing with some talks with China about, what would it take for you guys to come here, emerges and says, you know what they want? They want subsidies to build warehouses. And those subsidies would be $300 million to build warehouses around the Lambert Airport, and $60 million to pay freight forwarders, so the companies that tell planes where to go, to send planes here. And so we at the Show Me Institute, we kind of stepped back and said, why would you subsidize the creation of warehouses? What does this have to do with China? Why would China need this before it would come to St. Louis? And so we did some research. And one of the most basic things we did is we just drove around the airport to see, okay, is there really a shortage in warehouse space? And there's not. There's actually, the China Hub proponents say, okay, we need more than 20 million square feet in warehouse space. There's 18 million square feet in the metro area already available, and that's not including what's on the Illinois side.
Hold on a second. Current business practices, as I understand them, is to actually create a system by which you have stuff arriving just in time. That's the way, like Walmart, for example, oftentimes they just have enough in their stock rooms to cover them until the next truck is supposed to arrive. I don't know why you would need huge amounts of warehouse space. If airplanes come and drop stuff off, where are the trucks to just take it and distribute it?
Yeah, I have no idea.
So go ahead with your story now.
No.
I mean, that's a little confusing to me.
Yeah, it's very confusing to me as well. And I will say, if you want to talk about, okay, how would I justify the state giving me $360 million? You can better believe I'd have a big report. I'd have answers to all of these questions. These people didn't have answers to any of these questions.
Which are these people that you're talking about?
I'm talking about, one, the state legislators who really thought this was a good idea.
Can you name a name for me?
Sure. We have Senator Eric Schmidt was the one who sponsored this legislation.
Okay.
Caleb Jones in the House, Representative Caleb Jones, would say, look, I think this is a great idea because my constituents can drive their cattle up to St. Louis and have it in China by the next day. I don't know how likely that is, just given how long it takes to fly anything to China. They didn't have answers to, okay, but why is the 18 million square feet in warehouse space that we already have, why is that not enough?
Did you ask Senator Schmidt this question?
No, I have not asked him this question. Now, I have publicly said, okay, look, we have all this space. Why isn't that available? Why can't we just use that? They haven't said anything. And by the way, Cleveland, the city of Cleveland is considering becoming an Aerotropolis as well. It produced a 144-page feasibility study. It hasn't even asked for state subsidies. It just said, here's what we got, here's what other people are doing, here's where we think we could improve.
Hopkins is a great airport.
Yeah.
Plus they also have the downtown airport as well.
Right. And so they're doing their homework. And whereas the RCGA, which is the Regional Chamber and Growth Association,
yeah.
which is one of the agencies that's really been pushing this, they didn't have any such report. They promised one last year. It hasn't ever materialized. And by the way, we kept asking. We said, just checking in, where's your report? And it's like, oh, it's not available. It might be available after the legislative session ends, and perhaps we got the tax credits. They didn't, thankfully. At the very end, though, they produced an 8-page paper. It was filled with typos. It was very sloppily done. I mean, there was no real specific, concrete justification for why these subsidies were necessary.
So in short, the state of Missouri, which is extremely short on funds, was being asked to have taxpayers subsidize, it was $300 million in one category and up to $60 million. Now these are not just giveaways, these are they have to spend money and then they get some credit back, right?
That's right.
Yeah, it's not like we're just handing out $300 or
right.
$60 million.
Right.
It's like they're going to spend money and then they get reimbursed up to $300 and then up to $60 in
Right.
in these categories. But somebody thought that this is a great idea. What if suddenly it turns out that China doesn't really want to sell stuff here?
Yeah, and that was one question that I posed, and to state legislators actually when I testified, which was, surely there's the possibility of failure. What are we going to do if we subsidize all this warehouse construction on top of the 18 million square feet we already have that's vacant and available? And they just decide, well, we're not really interested.
They pull the plug.
Yeah, and it's not that hard to move planes out of an airport. It's pretty easy. And I haven't heard anything other than just, well, we're not giving them the money, so at least we'll have the warehouses. But if you think about that, that totally ignores the people who already have built warehouses and have already taken on the risk without these Aerotropolis tax credits. And I spoke to David Randolph. He's the vice president of CBRE, which is a brokerage company that rents out a lot of space in the St. Louis area. And he said, you know what, I don't think this is fair to existing companies who already have warehouses that are available. And I think that's a very valid point. Why would legislators pick some people who own warehouses over people who already have taken on the risk?
You got about 30 more seconds. Let's just do a conclusion on, so did this bill pass and what are the prospects for the future? Okay,
so fortunately in the spring, the Aerotropolis bill did not pass. So thankfully, Missouri taxpayers are off the hook for $360 million. However, the proponents of this, the RCGA, the legislators, St. Louis City, they're not giving up. They really want this to go through. So I think something that we have to watch for is maybe they'll have a special legislative session, or maybe this will come up again next year.
Okay, well, we'll keep an eye on that. Thank you so much for this very complete report on these two important topics. I've been speaking with Audrey Spalding. She is a policy analyst with the Show Me Institute. Hopefully you were with us for the whole time and heard this. That St. Louis LRA story was particularly interesting. And the China Hub, that's your pocketbook. See you next week.